Hello, I'm Catherine Cox. I am one of the Tutor training team, and I have been part of the Literacy Council as a volunteer in a number of different capacities for 15 years or more. Lesson planning. Most of the published series we recommend come with teacher guides that do contain complete lesson plans. But what if you don't have a ready-made lesson plan that covers what your student needs? In this topic, we'll look at creating lesson plans that can be used with both ESL and basic literacy learners, and with any level of student, beginning, intermediate, or advanced. These lesson plans may vary greatly in format and detail, but they have certain elements in common. If you know the essential elements, you can customize or create new lessons tailored for your students' specific needs. Lesson plans are for your own use. Don't worry, you don't need to submit them to anyone for review. But they're a key part of goal setting and instruction and help ensure that you and your student don't get lost on the path toward your student's goals. As a tutor, you will have more confidence if you're well prepared for your lessons, and you'll be better able to keep track of your students' progress. A lesson plan should answer 3 basic questions. 1, what does my student need to know? 2, how will I teach it? And 3, how will I assess what learning took place? The first part, deciding what the student needs to know, determines the learning objectives. The second step is to determine which activities you will use to teach the topic and what materials you'll need. Finally, you'll decide how you will measure what the student learned. The slide shows 2 pages of a lesson in the ESL series, Step Forward. Ellen, a tutor with the Literacy Council, expanded upon this lesson when her student got a part-time office job and wanted to know about paychecks. Ellen's coordinator had guided her to this lesson. The first page describes how to read information on a pay stub. The second page introduces office equipment vocabulary with conversation practice. Ellen really likes this lesson, but she wants to customize it for her more advanced student. What is the process for creating a lesson plan? The first part is deciding what your student needs to know by the end of the lesson. This becomes your lesson learning objectives. Objectives should be worded in a way that will allow you to measure the student's progress. The characteristics of SMART goals, specific, measurable, applicable, realistic, timely, also apply to the lesson learning objectives. Avoid starting learning objectives with terms like know or be aware of or learn, because these statements can't be quantifiably measured. Instead, use action words that demonstrate mastery, such as identify, name, and pronounce. For example, instead of writing, the student will know the English alphabet, write, the student will be able to recite the English alphabet without mistakes. Instead of, the student will learn 8 new vocabulary terms, the objective could be, the student will define 8 new vocabulary words and will use them correctly in an original sentence. In our example, Ellen decided to list 3 learning objectives because she believes that her student can move quickly through the material. You may want to focus on only 1 objective per lesson if your student is a beginner. When you're assigned a student, the coordinator will recommend an appropriate book and a beginning level. But like our tutor Ellen, you might not want to teach the complete lesson in the order it appears in the book. Based on your objectives, you can now decide how to teach that skill. Choose an activity, plan the steps to complete the activity, and estimate how long it will take. In our example, Ellen has decided her first activity will be to pre-teach key vocabulary associated with paycheck deductions and office equipment. The second activity is a fill-in-the-blank worksheet based on what was taught. Ellen estimates she will need 30 minutes for these activities. Ellen also makes a list of the materials and resources she needs to ensure the lesson is successful. For example, the teacher's manual, the student workbook, a picture dictionary, flashcards, and so on. If applicable, resources that incorporate your student's experience can help make the lesson more authentic. For this on-the-job lesson, The materials Ellen chose are listed on the slide. Part 3 of lesson planning is to determine how you will measure student learning after you've taught the lesson. This is often easier than you think. It doesn't have to be a formal assessment. As you observe, listen, or check for understanding, you are assessing student learning. You can hear and see how comfortable they are as they read, speak, and write. If your lesson's objectives were met, great for both of you, and move to your next topic. But if you determined that your student did not meet the learning objectives, revisit the topic the next time you do it with a slightly different game plan. It often takes time and much repetition for success. It's helpful to do a wrap-up at the end of each lesson. Summarize what the student has learned and whatever else feels relevant. It's also useful to keep notes about what worked and what didn't work. Here's a sample lesson plan template. This example shows the ESL lesson Ellen used for the lesson on paychecks using the Step Forward series. Your plan does not need to be this formal, but it should include all of these elements: objectives, materials, activities, and assessment. Handwritten notes on paper also work just fine. The format is not as important as the content. Your lesson plan is successful if it is a manageable and useful tool to organize and evaluate your students' progress. After the lesson, remember to write down your ideas for the next lesson while it's still fresh in your mind. You may think you'll remember, but it is way too easy to forget. Sometimes you might want to create your own lesson based on the unique interests and goals of the student. When teaching reading, remember to use before, during, and after reading strategies. You can look at the unit on comprehension for more information. Here's an example. Sandy is a tutor whose student is fascinated by the lives of the US presidents. Sandy decided to use this interest to help her student improve her reading skills. She uses before, during, and after reading strategies to incorporate activities and teach content. You can see that Sandy's lesson plan is less formal than those in the published materials, but it's detailed enough to keep the lesson on track. The lesson plan ensures she's prepared. It includes some reading, some conversation, some writing, and perhaps some math or social studies. If Sandy sees that her student is too distracted, upset about something, or tired to focus on the lesson, she can pull out a bag of activities that she's prepared for such moments. Perhaps online crossword puzzles, historical timelines, or other word games. She doesn't routinely make them part of her lesson plan, but she does know where they are and how to use them. There will be times when your student comes in with a situation they want to talk about or that they want help with, so be flexible. It's okay to have a spontaneous lesson in response to a particular situation. You're there to meet your students' needs. After you've reviewed the lesson, you can assign homework that will help your student internalize the material and transfer it to real life. Create an assignment that will allow the student to authentically practice the skills you've worked on. For example, if you've role-played grocery shopping, ask your student to incorporate a trip to the grocery store to practice asking for help with something. At your next meeting, you can review the previous lesson simply by reviewing the homework assignment. The length of review and whether you will reteach the topic depends upon your student's needs. Now let's think about ways to help a hypothetical student named Vladimir. Consider ideas for both the short and the long term. That is, for one particular lesson and for meeting long-term goals. Think about what Vladimir's objectives might be and what activities and materials you might use to help him meet his goals. Vladimir is a 35-year-old college graduate from Serbia who reads, writes, and understands English quite well. However, he has lots of difficulty communicating orally and needs to be able to interact daily with his colleagues at the research facility where he works. Vladimir is married and has 2 school-aged children. Since his wife also has difficulty speaking English, interaction with the school and their children's teachers are another concern for them. They would like eventually to obtain U.S. citizenship and remain here. Here are some objectives Vladimir might have. Communicate with colleagues at work. both work-related and just social. Communicate with the children's school. Increase vocabulary, including idioms. Work towards obtaining citizenship. These are some of the types of activities that could help him work toward these objectives. Role-play conversations for work and school situations. Practice pronunciation. Practice asking questions or asking for information. Help him become familiar with USCIS, the citizenship website. Have him read an article and give you his opinion or interpretation out loud. Prepare by having Vladimir bring samples from work so that you know what kind of research and what types of reports he works with and what vocabulary and conversation to work on. Some materials you might use for these activities are picture dictionary, sports section, or any other part of a newspaper that would interest Vladimir, work documents, this children's school website. Lesson planning does not have to be difficult, but it does need to be done. Once you develop a framework for a particular goal, you might just follow that for a number of lessons. Or often something you've planned as one lesson might turn into 3 or 4 lessons, so planning for them can be minimal. You risk wasting your time and your students' time, however, if you don't have some plan for each lesson. You owe it to your student to be prepared. Also, if you're confident that you're well prepared, you'll be less nervous going into the lesson. What we're showing here is a framework for how to plan your time effectively. You should go through the steps in this planning process before each lesson to help ensure its success. Once you've had some experience, the planning will go much faster. You can read more about lesson planning in the Tutor information book and handouts.